Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for jumping on today's Team Global Aloha. And before we get started, I neglected to find out if there were any announcements. If anyone knows of any, please feel free to chime in at the moment. I'll give you a second there. I think you can unmute. All right. Well, if not, we'll just go ahead and get started. And feel free to put it in the chat if you know of a particular announcement that our team needs to know of. So I am Debbie Cottrell. I'm a registered dietitian and have spent most of my time in specializing in what is called functional medicine now. We used to call it preventative medicine, trying to prevent illness. You know, when I was in school, I was never completely happy with being taught how to put a Band-Aid over a symptom. I wanted to know what caused the problem. I wanted to know how to get rid of the problem and not just cover it up. And so that's why I really was interested in functional medicine. When we joined LifeVantage, it was the science that caught my attention. And I remember going to my first elite academy, and I was focused on looking for the name tags on people and looking for doctors. I wanted to know if there were doctors in this amazing group of people. And I would go up to them, I'd say, I see you're a doctor, tell me about why you like LifeVantage. And I remember hearing at one of the doctors' meetings, Dr. Viglione, and this is one of the things that really caught my attention. She specializes in helping people to detox. And I knew detoxification was really, really important. And I was super intrigued with the fact that she used the NRF1, sometimes using 3 capsules, to help people detox before she'd even start them on the NRF2. And I thought that's fascinating. And then I also did a continuing education on mitochondria. Fascinating book. Those of you who like really to geek out, this is one of those kind of books where it gets into all the biochemical interactions. And I'm not going to tell you about biochemical interactions today, but I did want to share about this incredible little object called mitochondria, and to help you understand and have a belief in why our NRF1 is so very important. So I did make a few notes to make sure I would cover some of these really important things. As you know, the mitochondria is a little powerhouse. It's almost like an engine. And in this engine, it has a production of energy. So we think of cars and how you have the combustion of the gas and the oxygen, and it produces an energy to help the car run. Well, the mitochondria is similar to that, and it produces about 90% of the energy that's within a cell. So there are some high energy demanding organs, and one of those is the heart. That's kind of an obvious one. If the heart stops beating, we end up not living. So that's a significant one. I was amazed to find out that 40% of the cellular matter in one heart cell is from mitochondria. The liver is the next one, and about 25% is mitochondria. So what does that break down to? Well, in a heart cell, they say about 1/3 of it, and it's about 5,000 mitochondria in one heart cell. I didn't know so many of those little things could fit in one cell. I knew cells were tiny, but to imagine 5,000 of these little powerhouses in one heart cell. And then in a liver cell, and of course the liver is super important because it helps to detoxify the body, keep the body functioning. And there can be 1,000 to 3,000 mitochondria in a liver cell. So to have this many mitochondria, I mean, there's billions of them in the whole body, and to have them in each of our cells, this, you can see how this would be keeping this functioning in a healthy way would be so important. So The brain is another one. The muscles are also very, very important. As far as there's a lot of energy production for muscles and also for the brain. Fascinating, as I was reviewing some of the things here in my continuing ed book, I came across a page, and I just want to run down a few of these things with you because it's so valuable to understand how, with all these mitochondria, if something goes wrong with the mitochondria, there's so many diseases that are actually affected. So with muscles, you'd have weakness, cramping, muscle pain. That's kind of an obvious one. Here's with the brain, and this really caught my attention. You can have autism, you can have dementia and Alzheimer's when the mitochondria aren't functioning properly, seizures. ALS was another one, cerebral palsy, Parkinson's. So all of these are interdependent with the mitochondria in order to be able to have, if the mitochondria is not functioning properly, these just aren't going to function. The nerve cells, so critical with the nerve cells. In fact, in one of the places, when I was looking at how many there are, it said in a nerve cell, there can be, up to 100,000 in a nerve cell. And that's because of the way that, well, like here I'm geeking out, but how the nerves function and interfunction, it's super, super amazing. So if it's not functioning in the nerves, you're going to have nerve disorders. Kidneys can be kidney disorders, heart, cardiomyopathy. And we're seeing an increase of that recently for reasons that I won't get into, but a huge surge of cardiomyopathy. And again, the mitochondria is so very important with that. Liver function, the eyes, hearing loss. And I didn't realize that, but hearing loss can be affected because of the mitochondria. Pancreatic issues and just general system issues. So there's so many things that can be affected by the mitochondria and whether or not it's functioning properly. So if the mitochondria produce energy, then if they're not functioning properly, obviously they're going to produce less energy. And when there's less energy, it's amazing how that has an effect on cell damage and on the diseases that happen that we kind of went over there. Fascinating little point is that a mitochondrial cell or little mitochondrial little powerhouse has its own DNA. So a cell has DNA. We've heard about that, and we've heard how NRF2 helps to regulate and to balance out the DNA in the cell. And it also helps to balance out the DNA in the mitochondria, and keeping the mitochondria functioning is so very, very important. There's also an amazing thing that the mitochondria does, and it's this funny little word called apoptosis. So apoptosis, whenever I hear that, I think of popcorn, and it's kind of like that because as a cell gets damaged, it loses its function. So in order to keep the cells, the majority of the cells healthy in the body, there's a function which mitochondria controls, this apoptosis, and basically it's kind of a forced suicide of the cell. So when it's not functioning properly, the body goes, when mitochondria says, okay, you're not functioning properly, you need to not be existing in the cell anymore. So then they get rid of that particular cell. Interesting little fact is that when the mitochondria aren't functioning well and apoptosis doesn't happen, the rogue cell can very easily turn into a cancer cell. So I'll let that sink in just a little bit. And we have an incredible rise in cancers. So keeping the mitochondria healthy helps to get rid of the non-functioning cells, can help to prevent cancers. Amazing. As the cells age, they lose their information. And we've heard about that with the NRF2 and how, you can re-regulate those cells, those, especially the survival genes, to have, the correct information being expressed. And so it's interesting that the more damage that happens to a cell, they're less likely to replicate. But again, like I said, they can actually morph into a damaging cell. Interesting with okay, this is a little geeky, but with apoptosis, a cancer cell is sort of immortal. It just keeps replicating, and the apoptosis it doesn't affect that. So it just keeps going. So again, keeping that major function of the mitochondria, the apoptosis, going is super, super important. So when we think of some of the functions of the mitochondria, the apoptosis is one of those that's super important. It's also one of those that it re-energizes glutathione. So with the NRF2, we've heard about how it helps to produce more glutathione, which means that's like the little trash men that go around picking up the trash out of the cells and dumping it. But it takes energy in order for that to function. So when Rusty and I were talking about it this morning, he's just imagine if the trash man, he's got his trash truck. Okay, so if the glutathione's working and it can pick it up, but there's no gas in the truck, it can't take it and dump it. So it's super important to have the energy to be able to dump the trash, so to speak. And I think that's why Dr. Viglione likes to boost the energy levels in her patients that are super ill and help them to get those energy levels up so that then they can dump the trash with the NRF2. So hope one of these days maybe we can get her on, because it would be fascinating for y'all to hear her experiences, with that. Well, let's see. One of the other illustrations that I really liked, and of course, those of you who know Rusty know that he likes competitive sports. He's been in baseball, basketball. He's currently enjoys ultimate frisbee, but he says it's kind of like a team sport. So if you have some of the mitochondria working in a cell, but some aren't. So let's go back to the heart cell, where you have 5,000 of the mitochondria. Let's say 2,500 of them are working properly, and the other 25 aren't working properly. It's like a team where you have half of the players are really, really good, and half of the players aren't really, really good. Then the winning is less likely to happen. And I thought that was it kind of helps to put it in a little more practical level to understand how, how it's important to keep all the mitochondria healthy in the cell. One of the other things that I wanted to share when it comes to the mitochondria is that oftentimes as people's mitochondria starts to function less and less, then they start to either look to pharmaceuticals or to self-medicating. So a couple ways to self-medicate. Nicotine is one of those ways to help boost those energy levels. Caffeine is another one, but the interesting thing about that, and I think this is something that if you don't take away anything else, this is super important as a takeaway, is that caffeine it's not an encourager to the mitochondria. It doesn't say, oh, good little mitochondria, it's time to produce more energy. It's more like a mean ogre with a huge whip coming and whipping the cells, getting them moving when they don't feel like moving. They're exhausted, they're tired, they don't have the energy because their mitochondria isn't working. And these self-medicating drugs are like whips to the cells. So what happens? They borrow from tomorrow's energy. So it actually causes more of a decline in cellular function. So I remember when I found out that one of my kids was addicted to Monsters, and try as we might to help educate them on, having a healthy lifestyle, sometimes they opted to choose to do things that I wouldn't otherwise have liked. And one of them was choosing monsters. But why do people choose monsters? Because their mitochondria isn't functioning. They're lacking the energy. So thankfully, we had Axio at the time, it being an NRF2 activator, but we shared that with this particular child. And they tried the caffeinated one. And they said, this is great. I don't need the monsters. And we thought, yay, this is so much better for you. But then they wanted to try the decaf. The amazing thing was the way the NRF2 activates the brain, they didn't need the caffeine. So I thought that was super, super wonderful. And again, that's the NRF2 and not the NRF1 pathway, but I just wanted to throw that in there because of this self-medicating that oftentimes happens with the mitochondria. Now, the ideal would be obviously when they're lacking energy, the brain focus is so important, but also helping them, boost their energy levels through the activation of the NRF2 pathway. Let's see. Oh, one of the things I wanted to share with you was because we have a major virus going on right now in our worldwide, that particular virus kicks out spike proteins. Those spike proteins, guess where they like to land? In the mitochondria. And so what are we seeing? We're seeing significant drops in energy levels. People just completely exhausted because it's affecting their mitochondria. And especially, when people have like this long haul COVID, their mitochondria is just not able to function, at a level. When my mom got COVID, and she was in the hospital for 2 weeks, and it's at 87, it was a miracle that she walked away from there, obviously. Those of you who understand the protocols that the hospitals are using. But as soon as we got her home, we started her back in on the activators. She'd been on the activators previous. We started her back in on them. My sister had gotten the same virus at the same time. And my sister, unfortunately, did not want to take the activators. And we got my mom on them. My mom was willing. My mom is back to walking 2 miles a day at 88. She's feeling great. My sister's still dealing with long haul COVID, mitochondria. And it's crazy how that has such an effect. So one of the other things I wanted to just mention was we think of the tri-synergizer, and if you think of it like a 3-legged stool and how each of those legs is super important. If you can imagine pulling one leg off of the stool and trying to sit on it, that would not work very well. You might be able to do it for a while. So when you have the tri-synergizer, it's like 3 legs to the stool. But the amazing thing is, so the NAD, and I just wanted to, because they're all interrelated, I thought it was important for you to understand that the 7 proteins, those 7 sirtuins, they actually guard DNA. So remember, the mitochondria have a DNA. So they're guarding this mitochondrial DNA. It's kind of like a vault, and they're keeping it safe. So you can see how NRF1, NRF2, and the NAD, they all interrelate, and we could get into more geeky kind of stuff, but I just wanted to throw that in there so that you could understand why that's significant and how they interrelate, and how that NAD can help keep the mitochondria functioning like it's supposed to, and interrelate with it. So NRF1, this little guy right here. We won't go through all of the components and all the ingredients, but know that as I have been researching and as I've been learning, each one of them is critical for the production, the biogenesis, the maintenance of healthy mitochondria. So I can see why they put each of these ingredients in here. And again, if you've got questions, we can go over some of them, but NRF1 is a nuclear transcription factor. It's a pathway, and it coordinates the genes for mitochondrial biogenesis. That's what that NRF2 or NRF1 pathway does. So when you activate the NRF1 pathway, you're activating the good creation of healthy mitochondria. Now it's interesting because mitochondria, being a little powerhouse, and you think of an engine, they also kick off and exhaust. When they kick off that exhaust, we know it as free radicals. And what do we have that helps to combat the free radicals? NRF2. So the weaker the mitochondria, it's just like a car. Maybe you followed a car down the highway and it's kicking out this nasty exhaust, and you put the recycle on the air. The more unhealthy the mitochondria are, the more free radicals they're kicking off. And there's all kinds of other ways that it can work as well, but that's probably the simplest explanation. So having that NRF2 to help with those free radicals while the body's healing the mitochondria through the NRF1 pathway, you can see again how it's so interrelated. Let's see. One of the things that I was reminded of as I was reviewing in here, talked about antioxidants. So we've talked about antioxidants as it comes with the NRF2 activation, how it's kind of like that one and done. But a little fascinating point as we're talking about the mitochondria is that there's the antioxidants can have what's called an extracellular effect. You have a cell, extracellular is outside of, so it has an outside of effect, but not an internal effect to the cell. So the antioxidants aren't likely to combat the damage that's going on in the cell. Does that make sense? So it's affecting the damage that's on the outside of the cell. So again, going back to that mitochondrial DNA, antioxidants are not going to affect the damage that's happening with free radicals that are leaking into that mitochondrial DNA, and obviously into just regular nuclear DNA as well. So I thought that that was super important to help understand why antioxidants, they can be beneficial from a lot of perspectives, phytonutrients and things like that, but they're not going to affect the NRF2 pathway, the NRF1 pathway, as far as getting into the cell and helping the cell to be strong and healthy, like when you're activating the DNA that's within the cell. I don't know, I hope that's clear. But anyway, I just want to open it up for questions. In case you had a question about NRF1, I hope I can answer it for you, but feel free to pop on.
Hi, Debbie.
Yes.
So I often get the question, can I just take NRF1 by itself? So although I know the answer to this, I thought I would like to propose it so it can be recorded.
Very good. I love that. Thank you so much, Kamali. I appreciate you asking the question. So this goes back to oftentimes people can only afford one, right? And so when I look at the three, and again, it's this three-legged stool, they could try to balance on one leg, and they could probably do it for a while, but because of how it interacts, it's so important to have all three. So the NRF2 is the one we typically recommend. And I love the fact that the companies come out with these stacks that have reincorporated our flagship product, the NRF2, into the stacks. And you'll notice that there's the activation and energy is NRF2 and the Axio, but the ultimate energy one has the NRF1 in it. And that's because it's so important. So in answer to your question, Kamali, yes, they could take it. But again, as you are getting the mitochondria healthy, it's going to kick off the free radicals. So it might kick off fewer free radicals than when it was not healthy. But it's not, then the body's going to need to try to get rid of that as the trash, so to speak, as the exhaust. We wouldn't want to be in a closed garage with the car running, obviously, because our cells are the same way. They can't function with a buildup of those free radicals. So I love the question. Boosting the energy is so important, but we've really got to get the trash out. And I would say getting the trash out is going to be the first thing. And definitely we want, when I looked at the diseases, the number of diseases that are related to NRF1, it's crazy. Mitochondria is so important, you know, especially, and again, going back to Dr. Figlione, so important for helping people to detox. And again, that's those free radicals that are bouncing around in our cells, and we want to get those toxins out. So thanks for asking the question. Anybody else?
Hi, Debbie.
Hey.
Thank you so much. I love this educational share today. It's so good because this is going to be one that I'd love to pass on to people. You know, just your insight on it, besides us saying it, you know, is really helpful with you being a dietitian and stuff. So my question for myself is, because I'm like, you know, you guys know I'm an Axio girl. If I drink like 3 caffeinated Axios a day, is that too much for my mitochondria? I love the flavors, so I'm struggling because I love all the flavors, you know?
That's a fabulous question. And, you know, I love the fact, because as a dietitian, there's healthy uses of caffeine. So it's the unhealthy uses of caffeine. If we're not giving our body what it needs to be functioning healthy, we're going to compensate, we're going to self-medicate. So there's people that somehow their bodies can just process that caffeine and just boom, it's just gone. I mean, I know people that go to sleep right after drinking caffeinated Axio. On the other hand, if I drink even half a caffeinated Axio before noon, I'm toast I won't sleep that night. So it just all depends on how the body functions. But realizing that it's not so much the caffeine as the overall, are we using the caffeine to self-medicate? That's the big thing. So there's some people that, you know, they might start out with 1 cup of coffee and they go, okay, I'm not handling it. And so the next day it's 2 cups. And there was one guy that was doing 12 pots of coffee a day to self-medicate. So the doctor that at that point in time, this is way before we knew about NRF2 activation, but he used nutrition to help people get off their self-medicating things, whether it was nicotine or whether it was caffeine. But that was his, you know, his angle was to use nutrition. So we want to make sure that we're following 8 laws of health. You know, we're getting sunlight, we're getting proper water, we're getting nutrition, we're getting exercise, we're getting good sleep, you know, all these things. Let's just say somebody's not sleeping and they're medicating with caffeine. Okay, then you got a problem. So I hope that answers your question. Anybody else?
I have a question. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Katrina.
Okay. I recently learned about taking the probiotic so that our bodies our stomachs can properly digest the activators that we're taking. Do you want, is that, obviously that's what we would want to suggest to our clients as well, correct?
Absolutely. And I just finished a continuing ed on gut health, and gut health is so important. And there's a lot of factors that will affect our gut health. But the fascinating thing as it relates to NRF1 and NRF2 is there were some doctors who were giving the NRF1 and NRF2 to their patients, and they were finding that some were responding and some weren't. And when they added in the probiotic, for those who weren't responding, there was a change and a shift in the absorption. So that shift in the absorption helped them to be able to absorb and then use the NRF1, NRF2. So I'm a little funny in that because of my history with understanding that there are some supplements that that don't break down in the system. And in fact, you know, the septic pumper people, okay, so sometimes they would pump the bottom of the septic and they'd come up with supplements that had never dissolved. Okay, so I chew my Protandim. It's a little bit bitter. I prefer to chew it with a net, but for somebody who's having trouble absorbing, that's another way, is to make sure it's already broken down, because some people who have a very rapid movement of the intestinal tract, stuff might just be flushing through them before it can get broken down and absorbed. The capsules of the NRF1, they're going to break down a lot quicker, but that's that NRF2. So I love the question. Yes, probiotic will help with the absorption, especially if their gut is out of balance. So, Polly Graves.
Hi, thank you so much for this amazing training. Just to get back to Kamili's question, like, you know, going only on the NRF1, it's about the same question, because I have some people who say, well, I'm eating healthy, and especially a dietitian who says, no, I'll just make my patients eat healthy. Can you elaborate on that, being who you are?
I love that question.
Yes.
Thank you so much for asking that. And that, again, it goes back into Katrina's question and how oftentimes our gut is not absorbing. So, I mean, I'll go back and use myself as an example. I was eating primarily 85% raw food, mostly plant-based, organic, whole foods, not processed. I was getting the sunlight, the water, the exercise, doing everything. And, you know, when I turned 50, my genetic weak link started to break in my heart. And that's when my heart started to not function like it was supposed to. And I was doing everything I knew to do. Okay, then I took some supplements. I wasn't going to do pharmaceuticals. That's not me. I just don't like that kind of thing. So I tried some extra supplements, D-ribose being one of them, super important for the heart. Didn't change anything. It wasn't until I started activating my heart cells that things changed and things started to regulate. So, you know, when people say that, again, I like to share that example, but the other thing I like to share is years and years ago, they would measure, and we'll just take oats for an example. They would measure oats by a volume. So rather than a weight, pounds, they'd measure by a volume. So that would be a bushel. So a bushel of oats years ago weighed a certain amount. Fast forward to today, we have the exact same volume of oats. It does not weigh the same. Why doesn't it? Well, when people fertilize, when mass producers fertilize, they put back in like NPK, so major nutrients. Okay, this makes the plant grow, it makes it produce fruit, but it doesn't help to pick up the nutrients from the soil, because there's no nutrients in the soil to pick up. So those trace minerals, those macro and micro minerals that gave that volume extra weight are no longer in the food. So that being said, and years ago, you could eat one apple and get a certain amount of nutrients. Today, you'd have to eat 10 apples or more to get the same nutrients. So our food is devoid of the nutrients, not to mention the fact that, well, in this continuing ed I did, most children by the time they're 18 have been through 18 rounds, 1 per year of antibiotics. So what does that do to the gut? That just completely destroys the gut biome and then affects the absorption of the nutrients. So we're living in a day and age, years and years ago, yes, we could live on a farm, we had healthy food, we could eat that, you know, right off the plants, absorb those good nutrients. We don't have that today. So yes, years ago would have been great. Today, I mean, in fact, there are a few things that I would, as a dietitian, encourage people to supplement with, particularly because it's not in our soil. One of those is some of our trace minerals and our macro minerals. Does that answer your question? Good. Anybody else?
Just one quick question. Could you share the book? I want to write the title down.
Oh yeah, it's super geeky. So if you love to get into the bioscience of it all, it's fascinating. In fact, I did this about 5 or 6 years ago. I pulled it out and reviewed it, and I went, "Wow, I forgot." There's so much good stuff in there. You're welcome. Anybody else? Love the questions, by the way. Thank you so much. Awesome, awesome questions.
Hey, Debbie, would you ever be willing to do like an extra little science call where you just spend like maybe 10 minutes on each, the NRF2, the NAD, and the NRF1, and just kind of like, I just love the way that you explain it and the metaphors and just how simply, but yet still very like technical enough that, you know, and you're so articulate about it. You obviously know what you're talking about. So maybe one of these days, like maybe the beginning of June, you might consider, if you ever would,
Sure.
a science call, you know?
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
It doesn't have to be an opportunity call. If you don't want to do that, it can be like a training and we can just record it for our own purposes, or a science call as an opportunity would be really cool.
Sure.
It's wonderful.
Oh, good. I'm glad it wasn't too geeky. I tend to get off of that kind of stuff, but I'm glad it was clear. So it's so amazing. You know, the body is such an incredible machine, and how everything interrelates and intertwines. And when it's not functioning, you know, one part suffers. It's that team effect, you know, when one part isn't functioning properly, it just, the whole team just sort of starts to break down. So I'm glad it was beneficial. I love the NRF1. I think it's so important. Love the NRF2, hands down. That's my first go-to. NRF1 is so important, just because there's so many diseases related to mitochondrial dysfunction. So awesome. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you all for joining us, and glad that we could give you a little bit of science on NRF1, and I hope you all have a beautiful rest of your day. Aloha.